The radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Thursday, April 24th. April is almost over. God, I remember just recently that March was almost over. Anyway, welcome. Thank you for joining me today. And we'll be talking about Jordan Peterson, his interview with Rogan and his comments on this idea of a woke right, which have created quite a stir among the woke right. But it's all over Twitter and the internet. We'll talk about an example of cancel culture at the Naval Academy. So a speaker at the Naval Academy was an hour before his talk was canceled. God, I hope they paid him a lot of money and he didn't give them the money back. We'll talk about free speech in Europe, or put it this way, the lack of free speech in Europe. It's pretty astounding. I haven't really covered this in great depth on the show before, but we'll cover it more as we move into the future. It really is astounding what's going on in Europe. I've covered it a lot with regard to Danish cartoons and things like that for years and years and years, but recently I haven't covered it, partially because it's sometimes hard to tell what is true and what is media kind of right-wing hysteria. But it's as bad as the right-wing hysteria suggests it is. So we need to talk about it. And then we'll talk about the latest from the administration's attempts to bring peace, everlasting peace, to the Ukraine-Russia war. So we will cover all of that. I will note that markets are up again today. So markets are very optimistic right now relative to where they were a few days ago. I think that Elon Musk leaving Doge, going back to Tesla. I think that Trump saying, I'm getting nice to the Chinese and we're going to get a deal done. I think just a realization that, or maybe that's not a realization, a hope, a belief, that Trump is indeed not suicidal and he's not going to wreck the economy, although I think the market's still going to be in for quite a scare in the weeks to come. I think they're assuming that this sanity brought about. It turns out that when Trump talked about replacing Jerome Powell, that really spooked them. And now that he stopped talking about it, it's calmed them down and they're being more positive. So markets are up and behaving more normally in the sense of, I think the dollar is still down today, but so were interest rates. So everything seems to be a little bit more normal. But it might be premature. So I'm not giving investment advice, but it might be premature. You might still have an opportunity to buy on the dips, for those of you who love buying on the dips. So you might still have an opportunity to buy on a dip. We will see. We'll see what happens. All right. Want to remind everybody that you can ask questions. I see some of you have started. Good for you. We had a bunch of questions coming in. Remo asked a question well before the show. Don't put up questions way before the show because I think those get lost in the YouTube ether and I don't get them. So like 30 minutes before the show, I get them. But if it's a lot more than that, they kind of disappear on me. So be cautious of that. Today's show will be a little short. I do have a hard stop at 6, so an hour and a half show. So get in your questions now, and we'll calibrate the show accordingly. I don't know. Anything else? Any announcements? Don't forget, if you're in Michigan, next week on Tuesday, I will be in Michigan too. And I will be in northern Michigan, in the very, very north of Michigan, where it's really, really cold. Now, hopefully, that beautiful weather that Robert was describing the other day will sustain in Michigan. but it probably won't. So by the time I get there, I expect sub-zero weather and snow, not snow, but like rain and slush. Rain and slush. Jennifer says it's supposed to be 75. I'll believe 75 when I see it. I'll believe 75 when I see it. You know, it is Michigan after all. I'm expecting slush. Anything better than slush will be a happy welcome surprise. So that'll be good. That'll be good. 75 and slushy. All right, let's see. I have no idea what the weather's going to be. We'll wait and see. But you know, weather's like important. All right, where are we starting? We're starting with Jordan, with Peterson. So, you know, there's been a lot of talk. Two things have happened recently. One is the Douglas Murray Smith kind of debate appearance on Rogan, which caused a big stir on the right. And an ongoing has been like a feature of James Lindsay and I think Kissin, I forget his family name, talking quite a bit about what James Lindsay has defined as the woke right. The woke right being the right that is engaged in cancel culture, that's engaged in being very, very, very intolerant of any other views. Also, a woke right that is embraced identity politics, that is racist, anti-Semitic. A woke right that is kind of mindless, tribal, and kind of following, embracing Trump, almost everything he does. So, or thinks Trump is too moderate. It certainly doesn't embrace his support of Israel, for example. So, Lindsay has identified this idea of woke right. I mean, everything that he's identified is stuff we know, and I've been talking about since the alt-right days of 2016. And now Jordan Peterson has come in and trying to discuss who one should platform, who Joe Rogan should take on as guest, which was part of the controversy around what Douglas Murray had to say. He also got into a discussion of the characteristics of this woke right. So what I want to do is show you, I think it's about a minute, between a minute, 2 minutes of Peterson's appearance on Joe Rogan, and then read you some stuff that Peterson has written about this, and then I want to comment on it, and we'll kind of go from there. And there's other people commenting on the commenting, but it's interesting. It's just interesting how they're phrasing it, and how they're orienting it, and what they're blaming for it. And I think it's interesting. So let's take a look. Let's see if we can get Jordan on here. There's Jordan in the middle of a thought, as you can see. Let's play Jordan, and be tall. You guys have heard Jordan Peterson before, so.
You also set that conversation up, but it poked up and made itself manifest in that conversation.
He's talking to Joe Rogan.
And the issue is, how do you identify the psychopathic pretenders? And it's even worse now, and then make a barrier.
So note right off the bat that he's talking about psychopathic, right? The psychopathic. So he is identifying what Lindsay calls a woke right with a psychological problem, the psychopaths who've invaded the right. So he's dealing with the issue from a psychological perspective, and I want to we'll come back to that and whether that is appropriate.
Right. Now, the right was calling for the left to do that for decades. Right. And they didn't, and they couldn't. And the left is not good at drawing barriers.
So it's about drawing a barrier and not letting them in, not being associated with them, not platforming them, right? And this is all the question of, do you have Nazi sympathizers on the Joe Rogan show? Is that appropriate? and I think Peterson is being nice to Joe Rogan by saying, we need to set barriers. We can't just let everybody in because then they taint us. And he's absolutely right. I mean, he's absolutely right by this. What I find interesting is the way he characterizes them. I don't think Joe gets it. Joe's not. I don't get a sense that Joe's very smart, but Joe doesn't really get it. But Sadia, how do we separate ourselves from the psychopaths?
Partly temperamentally. The right is somewhat better, but there's no shortage of monstrosity there. And so then the question is, how do you draw the line? And that's kind of what I was, because I've been watching these right-wing, they're not right-wing, these psychopathic types manipulate the edge of the conservative movement for their own gain.
Right.
And a lot of that's cloaked in anti-Semitic guise. There's plenty of anti-Semitism on the left too, by the way. So it's not unique to the right.
Well,
but
particularly now.
Yes, particularly now.
Right.
And so, you've let your curiosity guide you, your curiosity and your desire for knowledge, this quest, you've let that guide you as a podcaster. And by the way, I'm trying to work through exactly the same sort of thing. How do you know, given your radical increase in stature over the last 10 years, how do you know when your curiosity and even your skepticism about the fact that things aren't the way that people say they are, because that's certainly been demonstrated in the last 10 years, how should anyone decide what guardrails to put up? Like, what do you look for?
This is the Jordan Peterson I have to admit. This is the thoughtful Jordan Peterson. This is a Jordan Peterson kind of thinking out a problem aloud. It's Jordan Peterson, what he's saying here is, look, the really crazy people around us, they're associated in some way with our movement, with our ideas, but they're crazy, and we don't want to be associated with them. In other words, Jordan Peterson here is struggling with the question of sanction, the question we in objectivism have talked about a lot for, at least since the 80s, but really Ayn Rand talks about this, the sanction of the victim. She talks about sanction all the time. How do we not sanction people who appear like us but are crazy? Crazy in Jordan Peterson's terms, psychopaths. How do we set the criteria? On the one hand, we want to ask questions. On the one hand, we want to learn. We want to hear from them. We want to hear from people. We want to get a wide array of views and points of view. But how do we limit that to not include the psychopaths? And that is a really good question. Now, I don't categorize him as a psychopath. He does. But that's a really good question. And I agree with Jordan, particularly for somebody like Joe Rogan, but generally for interviewers. It's not an easy one to answer, particularly as we start being suspicious of the motivations or the honesty of many people who present themselves as experts. How do we know who is legit and who is not, who adds value and who does not? And how do we know when we're sanctioning something that's so evil that it does us damage? I think Rogan interviewing Ian Carroll is a sanction of ideas that I think Joe Rogan, at the end of the day, well, maybe, is better than. Joe is very mixed. There's a section of this, I won't play it for you, but where he talks about Jews, and he buys into so many of the tropes. He buys into so much of the kind of anti-Semitic implications that he's even affected a little bit. So Jordan is trying to figure this out.
Do you have a conceptual system worked out for that? Like, because
and it's kind of funny because he's asking Joe Rogan if you have a conceptual system worked out for that. And you get a sense that Joe Rogan doesn't have a conceptual system worked out for anything. He's not that. He's not an intellectual. He doesn't think this through. He's not conceptual. In particular, he strikes people as honest, and he asks good questions, and he prods and pokes and stuff like that. but I don't think conceptual is the right. So Joe Rogan has no answer for this, and they go off on a different tangent from there. But I think what's interesting here, what I really want to get out of this is, A, that he's asking an interesting question, the right question. I don't think he has quite the answer, because I think he's thinking about the problem wrongly. And as part of that, I want to read to you what he wrote on Twitter, in the context of kind of James Lindsay's woke right and woke left kind of analysis. This is what Jordan Peterson wrote. He wrote, "It's not woke right and woke left, a la James Lindsay, although his diagnosis is not far off. He's off target, however, because it's not political. The problem is deeper than political, nearer the psychological, bordering on the metaphysical." Right? And then he goes on and says, it's not right versus left, red versus blue, Republican versus Democrat, or conservative versus liberal. It's cluster B psychopaths, dark tetrad personalities against everyone, including themselves. Manipulative language aimed at self-serving ends. Narcissism, the desire to gain reputational status without competence or effort, and predatory parasitism, otherwise known as psychopathy. And to top it all off, sadism, positive delight in the unnecessary suffering of others. And, and he goes on about 10 markers of political psychopathology and the rest of it. And, I mean, I find this really interesting. I've known, I've known psychologists and I've known economists and I've known a psychologist who told me once, yeah, it's all psychology. If we could just get people to have the right psychology, they would adopt the right philosophy. And in a sense, it's all about psychology. Everything can be explained in social psychology. And then I knew an economist who basically his perspective was, yeah, people are never going to grasp objectivism until they grasp economics, until they understand free market economics. If everybody understood how free markets worked, everybody would be pro-free markets. The barrier is not philosophical, it's economic understanding. They just don't get economics. They don't understand economics. We need to do a better job to teach them economics. And both of them consider themselves objectivists, so they understood ideas. They understood at least that ideas were there, that philosophy was there. And you're seeing it here. I think Jordan Peterson is absolutely right that the problem we're seeing on the right and on the left, kind of these crazy people on the right and the left. I call them crazy, but they're not crazy. These evil people, these really nasty people on the left and on the right. That it is not just political. And that the problem is deeper. It's deeper than political. But when Jordan thinks deeper than political, he goes to psychology. And then he says bordering on metaphysics, but I don't know what he means by metaphysics. I worry about what he means by metaphysical. His metaphysics is a little mystical, and it's hard to understand what he exactly means by that. So I'm going to leave that aside. But he goes to psychology when it's deeper, and I'm going to say it's deeper. It is deeper. And it is metaphysical and indeed epistemological. The problem is ideological. And one of the, I just want to, one of the elements I want to include here, this is Hannah Cox, who's, a capitalist, and she's pretty good. And she writes about a lot of these issues, and she writes in response to kind of Jordan Peterson, she writes, the right has a grifter problem and has been getting played by disingenuous actors who care about nothing but their own bottom line and who will say and do anything to advance themselves and who are often degenerates behind the scenes. So this is, again, kind of a psychological, but this is like, no, they're really just crooks. They're just trying to make money out of it. And here's the thing about all these explanations. One is they're not getting to the root of the problem because they don't want to get to the root of the problem. Because there's a sense, and this is particularly with for Jordan, the root of the problem is ideological. The root of the problem is, as he said, metaphysical. The root of the problem is philosophical. It's the ideas that these people hold. Some of them are grifters, no question. There's some crooks and grifters and just, but most of it is a corrupt metaphysics and epistemology. And and this is the problem. The problem is that the entire political spectrum, everybody pretty much on the right and the left, suffer from real philosophical flaws, real philosophical problems. Basically, collectivism and some form of subjectivism / mysticism. They all suffer from the same thing. From the woke left all the way through the center, all the way to the woke right. Now, some people in the center are a little bit less collectivist, but fundamentally, the conservative movement is a collectivistic movement and always has been. The national movement is a collectivistic movement. The religious movement is a collectivistic movement. The socialist movement is a collectivistic movement. So the movements from which these, call them extreme manifestations, manifest, all share a basic philosophy. And that all these extreme players are doing is taking those philosophies to an extreme. They're saying, okay, you want to be a collectivist? Let's really be a collectivist. You want to be a mystic? Like, we all are mystics, right? We all believe in God, Christ is king, all this stuff, religion stuff. Then, yeah, let's go all out. And, Candace Owen is just all out. Now, you could say she's just crazy. Or you could say she's a really manifestation of the ideas that are prevalent and dominant in the culture on both left and right. A distrust of reason, a distrust of our senses, a distrust of any kind of expertise, science, knowledge, a distrust of knowledge, a commitment to revelation, a commitment to ancient books. I mean, those are all ideas that are on the right. They're not ideas on the crazy right, and they're ideas on the left. They're ideas that were taught at universities and schools. They're ideas in the culture. They're ideas that I think, unfortunately, often, Jordan himself lends to those kind of interpretations. If you devalue reason, as our culture has, both left and right, what you're going to get is crazy people. People who think they have truth revealed to them. People who think that any interpretation is legit. The left and the right have adopted at various degrees and various forms kind of a postmodernist, subjectivist, tinged with mystical perspective on the world. And that's what explains the crazies on the right and the crazies on the left. Not that they're crazy. Not that, I think Jordan's perspective is, look, in every society, there's like 4 or 5% who are psychopaths, and those 4 or 5% are going to gravitate to the extremes, and they can take advantage of those extremes, and they can grift off of those extremes, and they're just the psychopaths of the 4 or 5%. But that I think lets the culture off the hook. That lets him off the hook. That lets the conservative movement off the hook. But the reality is the conservative movement and the center-left movement, the left that's a liberal in America, the liberal movement, have made all this possible. And they made it all possible by advocating for milder versions, inconsistent versions of, I think, what ultimately are pretty crazy ideas. Ideas that are inconsistent with reality, inconsistent with reason, and inconsistent with individualism. And these ideas are always, there are always people who take them more seriously. There's always people on the right and on the left, they're going to take them more seriously. I mean, Pat Buchanan was saying a lot of the stuff that Tucker Carlson and Candace Owen are saying, or MAGA is saying. He said it a long time ago. Now it's getting worse. It's getting worse not because the number of psychopaths is growing. It's getting worse because the culture is declining. The culture is descending. And therefore, respect for reason is in the decline. Respect for individualism, even in America, the land of individualism, is in decline. And as individualism declines, as reason declines, as freedom declines, more and more people become nutty, hold nutty ideas. What keeps us sane is reason, is our connection to reality. Now, part of the sense that they're all over the place, you know, you can name tons of them, right, is social media that brings them to our doorstep or to our computer and puts their crap right in front of us and we can't really avoid it. But they've always been around. There's just now more of them, and there are more people following them, partially because of our modern communication networks, but more importantly, because every decade, our educational system gets, worse. Every decade, we become more subjectivist. The right becomes more mystical. We become less connected to reality, less dedicated to reason. And once you detach from reason, individualism cannot survive. I mean, this will be part of my talk on Tuesday, what the Enlightenment gives us. Basically, what the fundamental value of the Enlightenment is reason. And when we move away from that, we move towards the ideas that lead to disaster. I mean, Marx is a move away from reason. Hitler and Mussolini are moves away from reason. And as a consequence, once you move away from reason, collectivism is inevitable. And the appeal of collectivism becomes inevitable. And it's taken a long, long time in America because America was so grounded in the ideas of reason and therefore individualism and therefore political liberty. After 250 years of people chipping away at it intellectually, philosophically, it's finally here. And as on the right, religion becomes stronger, and on the left, pure emotionalist subjectivism becomes dominant or stronger, tribalism is inevitable because the more those epistemological methods become dominant, the more we're detached from reality, the more afraid we become, the more the world becomes scary, the more we can't understand it, the more we look for mystical or conspiratorial explanations for it, and the more we huddle in tribes in order to appease or reduce our fear. Tribalism is a response to fear, to panic, to confusion, to not being able to take care of yourself, not knowing how to take care of yourself, not having the tools and not trusting the tools that make it possible for you to take care of yourself, not trusting your own mind. Ultimately, tribalism is a consequence of the undermining of the individual's capacity to reason. And that's the philosophical cause. That's why we're seeing such a big woke right. That's why we're seeing MAGA be so successful. And it's not an accident that MAGA overlaps dramatically with religiosity. And it's not an accident that even the crazy part of MAGA are the ones that have, Christ is king all over their profile, right? It's the religiosity leads them in that direction. Religion is the biggest conspiracy theory ever. Religion is the biggest deceit ever. And religion teaches us a form of knowledge that opens us up to any BS that anybody might spout. So Candace Owen wrote something about, I don't know, I think in response to Jordan Peterson, she wrote something about re-upping, this crucial conversation about Christ as King. And Jordan Peterson replies, Candace Owen, a truly farcical, and here means the Farsis, from the Farsis, who he considers, pretenders, not real religionists, a pretender. She vociferously proclaims her devotion to Christ for no other reason than to elevate her perceived status. Her outrage is designed not to shout the truth from their rooftops, build bridges to make peace, but to subvert Christianity itself with its new force to her own purposes. She is literally using God's name in vain. There are few more unforgivable sins. But no, this is exactly not the case. Yes, she is rejecting Christianity as you see it. But there is a long tradition of Christianity as Candace sees it. Indeed, I would argue a much longer tradition of Christianity as Candace sees it than a Christianity as Jordan Peterson sees it. Indeed, she is using the name of Christ as Christians have used the name of Christ for hundreds of years, and used it for hundreds of years before the Enlightenment. It was only the Enlightenment, and really before the Enlightenment, it's only the bringing in of reason and Aristotle into Christianity that kind of maybe marginalized the Candace Owens of the time, or maybe I don't think they even marginalized it, but made them less prevalent. Made them less prevalent. So no, this is the problem. The problem is Candace is just another Christian. But Christianity rests on a foundation of revelation and of interpretation of ancient books. Who's to say her interpretation is not better than Jordan's? What objective parameters? I mean, Jordan's smarter than Candace, but okay. But what do we measure these revelations against? Reality? How do we know what reality is? The problem with mysticism is, can't prove it one way or the other. You can be a better theologian or worse theologian, but who cares? And often the emotionalists won the day within Christianity. Anyway, so I think this is an interesting debate. And I think it's a mistake to view somebody like Candace Owen as just a grifter. Candace Owen is what happens when you take your ideas, conservatives, seriously, consistently. Yeah, to an extreme, but that extreme is consistency. And this is what happens when you abandon objective reality, you abandon reason and objective truth. So Candace Owen should not be viewed as some grifter who's just trying to make money. No. And she represents a huge consistency. Just look at how many people follow her. Millions. She's incredibly successful. I think a grifter means somebody who's coming in and cynically taking advantage of the situation. Like Candace doesn't really hold these views. She's just coming in to make money, and maybe she holds the views because they make her money and it's easy for her to convince herself. But in that sense, they're all grifters. Right? Anyway, it's an ideological battle, not a psychological one, not a battle against grifters, but ideological. All right, that's what I have to say today about Jordan Peterson and this issue. There's a lot more to say about it, and there's a lot more that we can return to. And it is interesting. The rise of MAGA, the tribalism, the rise of tribalism, the rise of these characters on the right who are particularly vicious and horrible. It's going to be a topic that's going to be with us for a while because it's not going away. It's not going away. And it's going to be an issue, and it's going to, in many respects, I think it's going to get worse because the corrective measure is not on the right. Is not let's abandon the mysticism, collectivism that led to us to this. Let's try to find the guardrails. What's acceptable collectivism and what's not acceptable collectivism. The guardrails between what's acceptable mysticism and what's not acceptable mysticism, and that's not the right approach. It's not the right approach. All right. So, just a quick story out of the Naval Academy, of all places, in Annapolis. So, Ryan Holiday, you might know Ryan Holiday. He writes a lot of popular books. He writes about Stoicism. Anyway, Ryan Holiday has been a lecturer, a guest lecturer that's come to the Naval Academy and given a series of lectures over the years on the virtues of Stoicism. I guess he's done this for 4 years in a row. And on April 14th this year, he was supposed to address the entire sophomore class of the Naval Academy with a talk that the theme of the talk was wisdom. About an hour before the talk was about to begin, he gets a call from the authorities at the school basically saying, look, we reviewed the slides that you submitted, and one of your slides talks about the fact that 381 books have been removed from our library on campus, and we'd like you not to talk about that. Now, these books were removed as a consequence of Executive Order 14151 that Trump signed, which ended racial and wasteful government DEI programs and preferencing. And as part of that, they interpreted it as pulling books that might somehow in some way be interpreted as racially related to DEI in some way or another, which is ridiculous. And those books were removed. Ryan Holiday, who's a believer, that you shouldn't remove books from libraries, was going to comment on this in the context of wisdom, in the context of discover what wisdom required. And why wisdom often required reading the people you don't like, reading points of view that are opposite of yours. Okay. Anyway, he refused. He said, no, I'm not going to take that slide out. I'm not going to not talk about this. It's important to my talk. Well, once he declined, the lecture was canceled, as was another talk he was going to give to the Navy football team about his book on Stoicism, right? So this is pretty stunning. Not only is it stunning that the Naval Academy kind of took out of its library 381 books because they were, I don't know, politically incorrect. Talk about cancel culture. This is cancel culture of the right. But that the Naval Academy, and that there was an executive order demanding this in a sense, or the interpretation of it was, nobody in the Navy Academy seems to have stood up against this. And they won't even let a speaker mention it and talk about it. Like, knowing what your enemy thinks is really crucial, even if you believe you're your enemy. And, Paul, Ryan is a guy who's spoken up against book bannings many times in the past, so it's not the first time he would have spoken about this. But it's pretty sad. It's pretty sad. I had here some of the books that were taken out. He writes. This is his op-ed in the New York Times where he writes about what happened to him. He writes, Hitler's Mein Kampf was not one of the books removed from the Naval Academy Library. And as heinous as that book is, it should be accessible to scholars and students of history. However, this makes the removal of Maya Angelou's I Know Why Caged Bird Sings inexplicable. Whatever one thinks of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're talking about not the writings of external enemies, but here, in many cases, art or serious scholarship and legitimate criticism of America's past. One of the removed books is about black soldiers in World War II. Another is about how women killed in the Holocaust are portrayed. And another is a reimagining of Kafka called The Last White Male. No people at any public institution should have to fear losing their job for pushing back on such an obvious overreach, let alone those tasked with defending our freedom, Naval Academy. Yet here we are. So these are the kind of books that were banned. I mean, what are they afraid of exactly? And this kind of puts to rest the idea that cancel culture is a phenomenon of the left and that censorship is a phenomenon of the left. And indeed, censorship and cancel culture are phenomena of intolerant, of ideologies that refuse to be questioned or challenged, and that fear the questioning and challenging. Now, DEI programs should be killed. I'm all for killing DEI programs. But if you're not willing to read what people who believe in DEI think, then how are you going to engage with those ideas and challenge them and overturn them? We need to read our enemies. And we need to make sure they are our enemies. Is the book describing black soldiers in World War II a bad book? Is it a book that presents an opinion that is, I don't know. I wonder if the people who banned the book know. And we're not talking here about children might be exposed to inappropriate material given their age. We're talking about adults. We're talking about an academy, a university. An academy, a university. And at an institution that is dedicated to defending us, to protecting liberty, to protecting Western civilization, to protecting our freedom, we are not going to allow them to read certain books. That's the right for you. That's the new right. That's the Trump administration. That's all based on an executive order. And it's pretty pathetic that people at the Naval Academy, who are supposed to fight for freedom and liberty, supposed to represent Western civilization, are not defending Western civilization internally in at least speaking up against something like this. Maybe even acting up against it and refusing to actually do it. All right. Talk about free speech in Europe. I mean, there's a story today on Yasha Monk, I think you pronounce it, Yasha, M-O-U-N-K, who's kind of a left-of-center thinker. There's a good essay on his Substack talking about free speech in Europe, and it's really horrifying. It really is horrifying. And the nice thing about having this come from Yasha Monk is when you read it, you don't get the kind of hysteria, exaggeration, panic, and interpretation of J.D. Vance or of the American right in giving this. You get a sober, rational presentation of the facts and analysis of what is going on. And I don't agree with everything he says, but it is quite good. It's quite good. It's on yashamonk.substack.com, and the title of it is "Europe Really Does Have a Free Speech Problem." He describes here the fact, I didn't know this, that if you like insult a government official, you can be arrested. Like there's this woman who is a social democrat who's in the government, who, you know, when people criticize her, she basically, she basically sues. Not sues, criminally prosecutes. So she's the interior minister, and this is Germany. This is not East Germany. This is not Russia. This is Germany. This is Germany, free country. Well, she has gone after people critical of her office, and many of them have been given hefty monetary fines. So in protest, a journalist published a satirical meme. It features a real photograph of the interior minister holding up a sign that's been digitally altered to say, "I hate freedom of speech." Now, to prove the point of this meme, the interior minister reported the journalist to the police. He was duly prosecuted, and after a brief trial, given a 7-month suspended prison sentence. I mean, this is nutty. There is a government official, the leader of the Green Party, Robert Habeck, has initiated 800 criminal complaints. 800 criminal complaints since he took the position of Vice Chancellor in 2021. So over the last 3.5 years. One of them, for example, is directed at a pensioner who had tweeted a parody of a ubiquitous ad for a German shampoo brand, the name of Schwarzkopf Professional, which features Habeck's face, the luscious hair under the slogan, whatever. Professional idiot, right? A professional idiot as the subtitle. The police raided the pensioner's home at 6 a.m., confiscated his iPad, and started criminal proceedings against him. And you see this regularly. A piano teacher at a local music university, mild-mannered lady in her 60s, was cycling to work. A car cut her off, and in a way that she was upset about, thought was dangerous, she flipped off the driver, a hand gesture. A few hours later, the driver was standing at the gate of her university demanding that she identify herself, and took her to court. The court found her guilty of the crime of, quote, insult, and required her to pay equivalent of thousands of dollars in fines. And we could go on and on and on about this, right? And this is the center-left government and the center-right government. They all uphold this, and this is all in the name of restricting misinformation, restricting the rise of the dangerous political views. Of course, they're never dangerous when they're on the left, like the communists can run. They're only dangerous from the right. This has a long history in Germany. It really started after World War II when Germany decided to emphasize the law to combat what they call extremist views. So they were the first European democracy to outlaw any kind of radical sentiments, hate speech, and certainly denial of the Holocaust was banned in Germany. You go to jail for that. And now it's much bigger than that. Now it covers insults and, as you saw, insults and flipping off or making fun of a politician. And if it was just Germany, we'd say, okay. But the reality is that this is now something that is spreading all over Europe and is becoming the dominant view in Europe. It's a very narrow view, not a very narrow, a view that rejects the idea of free speech if they consider it in any kind of sense. Insulting, hateful, misinformation, disinformation, anything like that. You don't have a right to say it. And you could go to jail for saying it. Now, you've probably heard of a lot of examples out of the UK. The UK is probably the worst country now. This is the birthplace of the Enlightenment, or a major force in the Enlightenment. The ideas of free speech and free intellectual inquiry, to a large extent, were born in England. And it is abandoning those ideas. Just to give you a few examples, at the end of January, 6 police officers walked up to the front office of Maxie Allen and Rosaline Levin in Hertfordshire. After they spoke to the middle-aged couple in front of their young daughter, they took them into police custody, where they would go on to be incarcerated for 8 hours under the suspicion of having malicious communications. And it turned out that they had raised questions about the process of choosing a new headmaster for the school their daughter attended, in a primary school. They had done so on a parents' WhatsApp group. And when the school leadership got wind of the criticism, they referred them to the local police. Criticism now is a threat. UK has no First Amendment. It has no codified constitution. And it has a history, a relatively modern history, of limitations on free speech. What's shocking is most of these limitations have come across from, well, it shouldn't be shocking, it shouldn't be surprising at all, from conservative governments. The first out of the Margaret Thatcher government. In 1986, the country introduced a prohibition on, quote, publishing threatening or abusive material intended to stir up racial hatred. Well, I get the threatening part. But everything else? And only racial? And this imposed harsh prison sentences. And we know that a lot of people have been prosecuted under this, under this law for stirring up racial hatred. You can't say anything about Muslims, South Asians, under this category. I mean, that's a clear limitation of free speech in the United States. You can certainly publish abusive material. Now, at least this one has some clarity about what constitutes unfree speech, speech not protected. In 2003, they added to the law something called the Communications Act. And according to Section 127 of this Communications Act, anyone sending a message over a public communications network can now be imprisoned for up to 6 months if it's found to be, quote, grossly offensive, if it is, quote, indecent, obscene, or menacing, or if it is, quote, false and sent to cause annoyance or distress. I mean, now you basically empty the whole concept of free speech from all content. What does false mean? Who gets to decide? Is Newton's theory of gravitation false? Well, a lot of people thought it was when he first published it. Are atheists? Atheism false? Is Christianity false? Is Islam? Are the myriad religions out there false? Who gets to decide? And annoyance. God, I'm annoyed all the time by stuff people publish. I'm annoyed by people on this chat. Edward, if we were in the UK, I'd have you arrested for annoying me. You got to stop annoying me. I mean, this is insane. And grossly offensive. And what is indecent? Really? Menacing? Maybe menacing you can get. It's like threatening. But annoying? Indecent? Offensive? False? Even false. A lot of things we think are false turn out to be true. None of them are defined. And that opens it up to people snitching on one another constantly about Twitter messages, email messages, chat messages, WhatsApp messages. And what you get is thousands of people being prosecuted. In 2023, there were 12,183 arrests made under Section 127 of the Communications Act of 2003, or Section 1 of the Malicious Communications Act of 1988. 12,183 people posted messages that were deemed false or annoying or offensive. I don't know how the number's so small, right? I mean, this is truly horrific. Most of these people did nothing wrong. Overwhelming majority were not threatening. They weren't inciting for violence. They weren't violating anybody's rights. A Scottish grandmother fell afoul of draconian laws established effective no-speech zones around abortion clinics. The 74-year-old silently held up a sign reading, "Coercion is a crime, here to talk only if you want." 4 police officers promptly arrested her. Now, I'm pro-abortion, but you have a right to be anti-abortion. Just don't impose your will on me. You can speak it. You can talk about it. An autistic 16-year-old girl was manhandled and arrested by police in West Yorkshire on the suspicion of a homophobic hate act for saying that an officer resembled her lesbian nana. The girl's beloved grandmother is indeed a lesbian. Now, these are obviously extreme cases to make the point, but no cases make any sense given these definitions. Okay. Now, under American First Amendment laws, none of these prosecutions would have flown. But in Europe, there are no limits anymore. So I just wanted to highlight this. Now is not the time where I'm going to do a whole spiel about the importance of free speech. You can find my lectures on the importance of free speech all over YouTube. I'm happy to do another one soon. It sounds like we need to do one in England. Maybe I can do one where I offend some people and, upset them, and maybe the police show up. But it really is. This is one of the bedrocks of civilization. Put aside Western. Certainly one of the bedrocks of Western civilization, of which these countries belong. One of the bedrocks of what has made the West successful over the last 250 years. And to see Europe abandoning this is truly horrific. Truly horrific. And needs to be fought. And, I've been talking about this since the Danish cartoons, and I've done a lot of talks about free speech in Europe and in the UK. It started out by not wanting to offend Muslims, and now it's not wanting to offend anybody. But truly tragic, truly, truly tragic. And I don't think the right in Europe, because remember that some of these bills were passed under conservatives, and conservatives in England haven't overturned any of them. And all the conservatives do, as we saw with the example of the Naval Academy, is they just use those same laws just to persecute the people they don't like. All right, finally, let's quickly talk about Russia and Ukraine. I don't have time to really go into this a lot, but I'll just say that Trump's betrayal of Ukraine and promotion of Russia just becomes more and more explicit every day. The peace deal that was being proposed has now been made explicitly. Zelensky commented on it, and then Trump went on a whole tirade against Zelensky on Truth Social, filled with lies and misrepresentations and just ridiculous statements, which he goes on. And then, Russia overnight bombed Kiev, one of the largest bombardments of Kiev since the beginning of the war. So Trump says, I'm not happy with the Russian strikes in Kiev. Not necessary, and very bad timing, because he's got a peace plan proposed. Vladimir, stop. 5,000 soldiers a week are dying. Let's get the peace deal done. I mean, he's so, nice to Putin. It's like, come on, Putin, you know better. Don't do this. Hey, I thought we had a deal. We're buddies. But Zelensky, oh, my God. You're clueless. You're harmful. What you're doing is harmful. Stop doing this. Please surrender. Surrender now. Give in. You should be thankful to me. Say thank you. And he says here, it's inflammatory statements like Zelensky's that make it so difficult to settle this war. The statement Zelensky made is much more inflammatory than Putin bombing Kiev while peace negotiations are supposed to be going on in the background. Trump is so disgustingly pro-Russia, so disgustingly fawning over Putin, so disgustingly anti-Ukraine. I don't understand anybody who defends this position, even if you think America should not support Ukraine, should stop it, it's a waste of money, whatever, then okay, then just leave, stop supporting Ukraine. But to be pro-Russia is despicable. It's morally despicable. It's geopolitical suicide. It's at every single level I can think of a disgusting, despicable thing to do. And so I don't know how anybody, even people who voted for Trump, how you can support this. And yet MAGA does, of course, and everybody does. It's unbelievable. Trump wants Ukraine to surrender to Russia, in spite of the fact that Russia has launched 2 wars against Ukraine and taken territory from Ukraine. Ukraine is supposed to apologize. Now, what message does that give to the Chinese about Taiwan? What message does that give to Russia about the next act of aggression? It is so weak, pathetic, impotent. Ooh, I should call Trump impotent. I like that. Impotent. It basically emboldens evil. And there's just not a reason to do it. So while people don't come out and say they support Putin, many people in MAGA support Putin. They just don't come out and say it. The criticism of Ukraine is just a way for them to hide the fact that they actually love Putin. And a lot of them love Putin. And the number one person who loves Putin is Donald Trump. Donald Trump is, he admires Putin. He loves Putin. He's Putin's lapdog. Vance loves Putin. Jordan Peterson. Remember Jordan Peterson's defense of Putin? Every interaction that Trump has had with Putin, from his previous presidency to today, suggests that Trump is enamored with Putin and that Putin has Trump's number. And what he's doing now is absolutely despicable and disgusting. And those of you who supported Trump should at the very least have the decency to admit that at least on this, he's way off base and way wrong. And this is unbelievably, and it really is unbelievably destructive to the United States, because it is. It actually is. It weakens the United States, and because it emboldens America's enemies. Somebody emailed me who wanted to remain anonymous. He said, we should start using this phrase. I like this phrase, so I'm going to start using it. The phrase is art of the fail. I mean, Trump is the worst deal maker in history. I did a whole show on that. And is a failure at every dimension. We didn't talk about trade today. We'll talk about it tomorrow, I'm sure. But in every dimension, this guy is a failure, a loser, art of the fail. That's what we should start calling. That should be his new book. All right. That is the news for Thursday, April 24th. Thank you guys for joining me. And let's jump into answering your questions. We're on a bit of a tight schedule today. So I'm hoping to get to all the questions. If I don't, of course, whatever questions I don't get to, I will answer tomorrow. I will start with the $15, $20 questions and then go to the $5, $10 questions. And we will go from there. I also want to thank all the stickers, Doron Regev, Nevfel, John Glue. Thank you guys for the support. Mary Aline, Rang, 2030G. Those are the stickers that I can get to right now. So thank you all. Thank you all for the support. Who else did stickers? Oh, we also have Antonio did a sticker and Catherine did a sticker. So thank you guys. All right, Remo asked a 60 euro question. So thank you, Remo. By the way, stickers are really, really welcome now. We're short of our second hour goal, so please jump in with stickers. I don't know if we can answer all the questions, so stickers are preferred right now. Remo says, how has private equity changed the private credit market in the last 20 years? And how do you think the private and public credit markets will evolve over the next 20 to 30 years with regard to PE, banks, and fintech? I mean, fundamentally what's happened is that Dodd-Frank has basically made it expensive and difficult for banks to lend money, to make loans. It's made it expensive and difficult, and regulations penalize them for doing too much of it. It's much easier for banks to take in deposits and buy government securities, buy bonds, and make a little bit of money, but it's steady and it's fairly safe, and they don't get penalized for having a loan portfolio. So bank lending is basically down significantly over the last 10, 12 years since Dodd-Frank. And look, somebody has to fill in that gap. Businesses still need money. They still need to borrow money. And what has replaced it are all kinds of private lenders. Some of them you would call private equity, but basically these are private lenders. What they do is they raise capital, and they borrow some capital. They often borrow that money from the banks, funnily enough. And then they lend that capital to businesses. And they make a return on the loans. And instead of paying depositors, they pay their investors a return on their investment. So a lot of the gap that the banks used to fill, a lot of the lending that the banks used to do is now done by private credit. Private equity, if private equity typically buys equity in companies, and they fill the gap. But if you're running a company, if you're running a small, medium-sized company, and you cannot borrow money, but you need capital in order to grow, well, one way you can do that is through private equity by selling a percentage of your company or selling the entire company to private equity company. They raise capital. They make loans on a larger scale. They can still get loans from the big banks, and then they use the money to grow the company. And I think what you'll see, generally what we're seeing is the slow disappearance of old-style banking. I think banks are basically going to disappear. I think if we had free markets, the banks as we know them today would change dramatically anyway. But what's happening today is traditional banks are slowly disappearing. The big banks will survive, but the small banks and the medium-sized banks probably will not. Fintech will do okay, but fintech is not very well positioned to make loans. And you'll see more and more of these private lenders, and you'll see a bigger and bigger role of private equity. Now, none of this is the free market solution, but this is given all the regulations, given all the controls, given all the incentives, this, I think, is what's going to happen. Disappearance of banks. Fintech will deal with all that consumer stuff and simple loans that can be made based on an algorithm, based on a questionnaire you fill out online and a certain algorithm. And the rest of the world will function through private credit markets and through private equity. Thank you, Remo. Appreciate it. Tassos, thank you for the $50 sticker. That is very, very much appreciated and brings us much closer to our goal. Alan, thank you for the sticker as well. Ryan, hi, Yaron. I'm looking forward to seeing you at OCON and playing poker with you. Me too. We need more people at the conference and at the poker table. What better way is there to spend the 4th of July? I agree completely. And you guys, you can actually get a discount right now. The Ironman Institute, which sponsors this show, is offering listeners to the show, watchers of the show, a 10% discount. And now OCON, it's going to be in Boston, 4th of July, 1st to the 5th of July. It's going to be a great week, 5 days. It's going to be a lot of fun. Poker will be part of it. Great lectures will be part of it. Socializing and hanging out will be part of it. Having discussions with people is going to be part of it. Meeting a lot of people who listen to the Yaron Brook Show will be part of it. So join us. You can get the discount by going to the OCON website and signing up and using the code, the discount code, 25YBS10. 25YBS10. Thank you, Ryan. Hopper Campbell, people will make excuses for Trump behavior up to a point. Right now, many people hate woke more than tariffs. But if Trump's behavior becomes more and more unhinged, enough people who matter will turn on him. We will see. His approval rating right now is the lowest of any president after 100 days in office, lower than his was in his first term, which was the lowest ever, and now this time it's even lower. So people are already turning on him. Again, Trump, at least to some extent, won because people rejected the left, not because they loved him. It is stunning, though, that it's still true that 45% or 44% of Americans still approve of him. Who are these 44% of the people, and why do they approve of him? And now, people are soon, I think, by the middle of next month, by the middle of May, people will start feeling the tariffs. By the middle of next May, shelves will start emptying out. Now, I don't know how long that'll last. That depends on what Trump does between now and then in terms of tariffs. But a lot fewer ships are sailing from Asia to the United States with goods. It takes them a certain amount of time to get here. And those ships that are not coming and the inventories that are going to be depleted as a consequence, we're going to start feeling that starting middle of May. And we're going to see if people turn on Trump, maybe even his own people turn on Trump. I did have a story about people turning on Trump. Maybe I'll use it. A story about people kind of turning on Trump. Yeah, I don't know why I didn't use this. I'll try to use this tomorrow. This is a really powerful story, so I'll try to use it tomorrow. Rang 2300. Yaron, I got a high-paying offer to work as a software engineer at a major porn site. Oh, God. The scale and engineering challenges are fascinating. Morally, is it wrong to take the job? I'm also unsure how it'll affect my CV long term. Look, I think it's okay to work for a porn site as an engineer. if it's really going to advance your career and you're really going to, and as you said, the engineering challenges and scale are fascinating. I don't think porn is the ultimate evil that people make it out to be. I think there's a lot of bad and people use it badly, but I don't think porn, is all evil. It partially depends on the porn site, I guess. But I do worry about your CV. I do worry about that. Now, I don't know if it'll hurt you or not. I mean, you should talk to people in industry about it, about whether that'll hurt you or not. So, and you got to put it on your CV because you want to show that you've dealt with these challenging issues. So I would definitely seek out people in the software industry and ask them whether they think. Now, I know somebody who took a job, he didn't realize, I think ultimately it was a porn site. I don't think he realized that when he took the job. And I don't think it affected him long term. But that was a long time ago, and it was the early days of all of this. Today might be very different. So I would definitely put in a little effort into asking around. You're in Israel, it looks like, because you're paying in shekel. Certainly, I don't know in the Israeli market how this affects, although you're probably working remotely for an American company would be my guess. I don't know. But I would definitely try to figure out, would this hurt you or won't this hurt you? Because I just don't know. James, is not settling down until you find the perfect partner unreasonable? Even if you love somebody, you'll never be absolutely perfect. There will always be flaws or elements of them that annoy or bother you. Yeah, I mean, I think it's unlikely that you find that utopian perfection, maybe, that in real life there's always something. But you really have to figure out, do I love this person? Do I love them? Are they really, really, really important to me? Do I want to spend the rest of my life with them? Now, you might not. You might get a divorce. But when you marry somebody, you're at least thinking, I could spend the rest of my life with this person. I imagine I could. I'm projecting that I could. That it really needs to be the standard. So love needs to be there. Respect needs to be there. Good sex needs to be there. And this idea that in spite of the fact that they annoy me or bother me in certain things, I think I can really be happy with this person long term. All of those considerations. So if you mean settling down, getting married, or establishing a long-term relationship, moving in together, and then I think, yeah, don't look for some platonic ideal, but also don't compromise. And certainly, if you have an inkling that, no, if I have to put up with this for 5 years, I'm going to go crazy. Yeah, then don't do it because you will go crazy, likely. So make sure that the things that annoy you are not so annoying that you can live with them at least for a long time, because you're going to be with them for a long time. Andrew, psychology has major impacts on societal ills, but philosophy is the primary. Narcissists are drawn to power, but properly, there would be no power to grab. Capitalists provide guardrails that wall off psychopathy. Psychopaths. I mean, look, but this is the point. There would be fewer narcissists. There would be fewer psychopaths. There would be fewer grifters. With good ideas, more people would be oriented towards goodness. I mean, I think certainly narcissism is a psychological response to the rejection of altruism. They reject altruism and they don't know what to replace it with. And narcissism is an unfortunate, bad alternative to altruism. But the response, the negation of altruism is good, is right. But if altruism wasn't a dominant force in the culture, I think there would be a lot fewer narcissists. Now, I don't know enough about the psychopaths and how many there really are and whether you're born a psychopath or not. I don't know. But I believe that all mental problems, particularly these kind that are kind of social, are consequences, or at least are exacerbated by bad ideas, by bad philosophy. Philosophy drives our psychology. It doesn't just drive the culture. Everything's interrelated. So we would be so much healthier psychologically if we had the right ideas, and if the culture embodied those right ideas. A lot of the psychological issues would go away. And psychologists would actually be primarily focused on taking a healthy psychology and just helping you to live the best life that you could live on the self-help aspect, rather than the undoing all the problems that you have because you're growing up in a culture that has really, really, really bad ideas. So, psychology, a healthy psychology ultimately comes with good ideas. It's not guaranteed, but certainly, probabilistically, you're going to get more people with good psychology when you have good ideas. Michael, does it appear Trump is being put back on a leash? A little bit, a tiny little bit, by the market. Not by any people inside the administration. I don't think there's anybody in the administration putting him on a leash. I think he's afraid of the market. He's afraid of CEOs being unhappy. He's afraid of a recession. And he's afraid of the stock market collapsing and the bond market collapsing and the dollar collapsing. He's afraid of a legacy of depression and recession and financial collapse. That is what's putting a leash on him. Esoteric dichotomy. How much fantasy is too much? Broad question, but many people escape reality through fiction. Some prefer shows, video games, books to real life. Well, I mean, anytime you prefer any of those things to real life, it's a problem. So it's anytime it's an escape, anytime you're using reading a book as an escape from reality, anytime you engage in fantasy as an escape from reality, or a video game as an escape from reality, that's bad. Reading good fiction is adjacent to reality. It's part of your reality. It's wonderful to live in the book of the book, the world of the book, but it's also wonderful to come back into reality, and the two reinforce each other. The same with video games and everything else. And if you are becoming obsessed by any of this, if you're using it as an escape, if you're using it not to be productive, not to make decisions, not to live your life, not to move out of your parents' basement, then it's a problem. Then it's a problem. Your life's central purpose needs to be your career, which means needs to be out there in reality, working out there in reality. To the extent that this prevents you from doing that, it's a problem. You need to stop. It's too much. I like numbers. How do you define gatekeepers? Who are they today? Well, millions of there are lots of gatekeepers. Gatekeepers are, publishers of newspapers who decide which stories to write and which not, which op-eds to publish and which not. They're podcasters who decide who to interview and who not, which stories to tell you about and which not. I'm a gatekeeper in a small way to my small community and my audience. Television shows, Facebook and Twitter, to the extent that they screen out certain content, and to the extent that they have an algorithm that highlights certain content for you, all of those are gatekeepers. So anybody who is filtering information that you might get in some way, one way or another, is a gatekeeper. And we need gatekeepers. Gatekeepers are essential. We cannot live our lives, follow our careers, do everything we need to pursue, and get bombarded with all the information there is in the world. We need to be able to figure out and siphon through what's worthwhile and what's not worthwhile. And having somebody do that for you is essential. It's the fundamental role of the intellectuals. Michael, is the only way for them to make us really poor to abolish private property outright? Short of that, markets find ways to use the things we need. Well, no. I mean, Great Depression made a lot of people poor, and it didn't abolish private property. And the Great Depression lasted a long time. It was really horrific for a lot of people. So there are a lot of ways you can make people poor. You can regulate, you can control, you can destroy businesses, you can increase taxes. The abolishing private property is the extreme, but there are lots of intermediary steps that'll make people poorer. Markets can't deal with force. Markets are not there to deal with force. They can try to find ways around force, which are expensive, but some forms of force they can't deal with, and therefore you suffer the consequence of them. Not your average algorithm. Do mean and hateful comments ever shake your metaphysical confidence or hurt your feelings? No, not really. I mean, they shake my, I don't know, when I read them, I get the sense, oh, the world is worse than I think it is. So they shake my confidence in the state of the world, but not my metaphysical, and they don't hurt my feelings. I mean, what the hell? I mean, why would they hurt my feelings? These are people I don't know usually saying stupid things. I mean, it reflects on their stupidity. It doesn't reflect at all on me. So my feelings are not hurt. Not your average algorithm. Our universities have been infested with hates masquerading as human rights activists. Haters masquerading as human rights activists. Yes, absolutely. And it's not going to go away because the fundamental ideas being taught at the universities are not changing. The haters might change party, they might change, but the haters are still going to be there. Our universities teach them to hate, and they teach them that their hatred is virtuous. Michael, anti-reason and tribalism in the culture never seem to favor the left, even though they are the ones promoting it. Well, I don't know. The left often dominates our culture and still dominates our culture. And so I'm not sure what favors mean, right? It's that the left has done very well over the last 100 years, very well financially, very well in terms of power. So I'm not sure why it never seems to favor the left. Politically, well, I mean, there are periods in which it doesn't, but there are periods in which it did. I mean, Obama, Biden, who knows who's coming in the future? So it's not clear. I mean, part of it is the fact that most people ultimately reject disintegration, what Leonard Peikoff called D2, and that is typically left, the far left. So they reject it in favor of usually M2. But that doesn't mean the left doesn't benefit in the meantime. Michael, why doesn't China have a welfare state? How is it still considered socialist without one? I don't consider it socialist. I consider it fascist. I think it's a fascist state. I think it has been since the early 1980s, primarily a fascist state. It was too poor originally in the communism to redistribute wealth because there was no wealth to redistribute. You have to have somebody to redistribute it from. And since then, China's been statist, but the Chinese authorities don't really care about the poor unless the poor want to overthrow them. So the Chinese state basically gives the poor enough so that they don't overthrow the regime. They do it by a variety of different means. One of the means is by allowing them to come to the cities and get jobs and become less poor. But yeah, China does not have a welfare state, or it has a very, very minimal one. And as long as the poor don't rebel, they will keep it that way because the authorities are not interested in the poor. They're interested in the state. They're interested in what the well-being of, quote, China, the collective well-being, the common good. They're much more fascist than they are socialist. James, do you think Trump was shocked he was able to win a second term? No, not really. Remember, he lost by a small margin in 2020, and he could see how pathetic Joe Biden was. And he could see that the Republicans loved him. I think he really had that confidence because so many Republicans rallied to his cause. If Republicans had turned his back on him, as they should have, after January 6th, then I think he wouldn't have won and he wouldn't have had the confidence. But they didn't turn on him. Quite the contrary. Joe, thanks for everything you do, Yaron. Do you think the criticism Israel, specifically the killing of civilians, is tied to moral relativism, that you don't have moral authority to kill in self-defense? Well, to some extent, but it's tied more specifically to altruism. The idea that you shouldn't morally kill, even if it's in self-defense, and particularly when the self-defense is not direct. It's not somebody running at you with a knife and you shoot and you happen to kill a civilian in the vicinity. No, they're not running at you with a knife anymore. They're pretty weak right now, and it'll take them years before they have enough knives to come run at you. So preemption is wrong. And, September 7th, it was okay to kill them, but after September 7th, they're not killing you anymore. So it's altruism, various forms. Moral relativism is one form of it, because moral relativists still have to have something they view as immoral, and they revert to altruism because altruism is all they know, all the relativists know. So it's altruism as the fundamental, moral relativism as the way it's being applied right now. Wes, thank you for the $50 sticker. Really, really appreciate that. Friend Hopper, thank you for the sticker. Really appreciate that. Martin, Nick Fuentes is the head of the snake. I don't think so. I mean, he's one of the people there. I think Tucker is much more the head of the snake. I think even Candace's audience is bigger than Nick Fuentes's, I think. Nick Fuentes is just one more scumbag among the many that populate the woke right. Martin says, his followers dominate discourse on X. Maybe I just don't see them. Maybe the algorithm doesn't feed them to me. I see much more of Candace and Tucker than I see of Nick Fuentes. Adam, presidential response to Putin. Stop. Trump. What? Stop. Trump. Don't Biden. Yes. I mean, it's all they've got is one-word answers to Putin. All right, I'm going to rush through these remaining ones. I apologize, but need to end here soon. Jacob says, I think Jordan said it got worse because social media allows people to not recognize the grifters. I think it is partially true, but mostly evasion. Yeah, I mean, it got worse because ideas got worse. It got worse because the right got worse, because the conservatives got worse, because they became more collectivistic and less open to reason. Michael, is Trump turning on Putin and removing tariffs? I don't see it. I don't see him turning on Putin at all. And he might cut tariffs to China from 125 to 60, but 60% tariffs from China still means basically a dramatic reduction of trade with China. And that's not going to change. The Chinese are not going to somehow compromise. So no, I don't see Trump removing tariffs or turning on Putin. Now, we'll see. He might be forced to do something dramatic on tariffs, but he hasn't shown any inclination to do it yet. Thoughts on Carl Jung, a Jungian psychology. I don't know much about Carl Jung. Probably bad, but I don't know anything about him. So I have to reserve judgment. Ian, how much should I put into Trump's meme coin so that I can get to attend the dinner with him and tell him how much I despised him? And should we call them bribe coins instead of meme coins? Well, I mean, not all meme coins are bribe coins. Just Trump meme coins are bribe coins. And I think you should buy. You should have bought before he announced the dinner. Now it's too late, so I don't think you should buy any now. But I don't understand why you didn't buy them a week ago, so that when he announced the dinner, you could have made a fortune and then sold, and then not having to attend the dinner, but made money off of stupid Trump accolades. Of course, you would have needed inside information to do that. But hey, this is why you have to cultivate sources inside the White House. Nick, I live across the street from Waymo Station in D.C. I wish more people my age were passionate about less government regulations so we don't have to drive anymore. That would be very cool. Gail, I agree Trump is a horribly disgusting and I think evil person. I have felt that way about him since his treatment of budding entrepreneurs on the Apprentice TV show years ago. I never liked him, but I didn't see just how despicable he was until he became president, or until he ran the campaign. What he did on the campaign really, really convinced me of how evil the guy is. Mary, I think we should all search for Art of the Fail. Yeah, we should. I mean, we don't need to search for it. It's right there in front of us. Art of the Fail is Trump's MO. Andrew, for those who viscerally hate what for that matter, what Ayn Rand had to say, if it's so wacky or false, why not just ignore? Isn't the hate an admission of the power of the message? I think to some extent it is. I think, yesterday the guy came on and said, oh, you lost that debate to Jay Dreyer, and he went on and on and on about that, and no concrete evidence of that, but just I mean, why is he here? What's he doing? What's the purpose? Why is he so upset? What did I say that upset him so much? Even if I did lose, so what? Yeah, something suggests that they know there's something going on here. Okay, Andrew says, I'm not giving him any excuse, but do you think Trump pretended to win in 2020 to such an extent that he genuinely now thinks he won? If so, would it change your moral evaluation of him? No, because pretending, evasion, evading so much that you convince yourself of a falsehood is still evil. He is a bad, bad human being, and that evasion, it just proves it. So no, it doesn't make me think any better of him. All right, everybody, thank you to all the super chatters. I really have to run. I will see you all tomorrow at about the same time as today, 4:30, I think. But we can't go longer tomorrow. I don't have a strict deadline tomorrow, so we will be able to go a little longer tomorrow. So I will see you all tomorrow. Have a great rest of your Thursday. Have a great Friday. And we will talk soon. Bye, everybody. Have